So, what was going on here? I mean, looking at various governance theories, there were an awful lot of people who were responsible for making sure that what happened to Enron didn't happen. A lot of people, Enron was in the States, early 2000s, after corporate governance had been a real consideration for 35 years, since the days of the investigation of managerial hegemony, since the days of the consideration of shareholder value, since the days of we'd started to look at the roles of directors, etc., and loads of people started to become aware of the problems. We had a very real investigative decision here, surely. And there were a lot of people supposed to look. So who was supposed to look? Who were the watchdogs who didn't bark? Well, the debt rating agencies. This was before the days of the Big Short, when the debt rating agencies were really humiliated. But this was still a situation in which, if a debt rating agency wanted to have access to Enron, then it had to give a rating that Enron would like. And therefore, in return for access, many of the debt rating agencies were giving Enron bonds, Enron stocks, AAA ratings, which they were well deserved. The security analysts, who are the people who investigated this? Well, actually, many of these analysts work for the corporations they're investing in. And Enron had a very simple approach. If an analyst that worked for it didn't rate it highly, they would fire them. Externally, analysts worked for various other corporations, for various banks, and also for various other organisations. And Enron spent a lot of time and money providing its private jet. For instance, it's notable that they provide the private jet that flew George W. Bush's legal team to Florida in the ballot recount. So he was very well connected and was able to help manipulate who was become president of the United States, was involved in all that. And therefore, a lot of analysts, a lot of security things saw this as a powerful man with a friendly, casual relationship. The President of the USA, President George W. Bush, used to refer to him as Kenny Boy, and that sort of thing. They were very close to the old Texas attitude, sort of working together. So actually, there was a huge number of security analysts who were not making this sort of investigation they're supposed to do. And Enron was manipulating them, capturing them. The merchant banks, primarily the funding, they were, as long as their interest was being paid, and at this point it was, Enron was burning through its investors' cash, but it was repaying its loans, etc. As long as it was doing that, the merchant banks, as long as the shares were still going up in value, the merchant banks felt they were making money, so they were themselves unconcerned, and they get it going forward. And the journalists, the fourth estate, then experts who were supposed to be investigating Enron at all occasions, but far more likely to be accepting Enron hospitality, respecting around the Enron private jet. Even when journalists did ask difficult questions, a huge amount of pressure was put on them by Enron and by the banks, by the corporations. A lot of the academic investigators were too busy writing their books on how Enron was a fantastic disruptor of the economy that was producing brand new ways of making profits and brand new ways of doing business, and as such was beyond reproach. But they're all failing. All are failing. They all seem to be investigating something, and none of them are succeeding. It's not that there weren't some people who were prepared to speak out. There were people who were prepared to speak out. But actually, even though they were prepared to speak out, they were far too often they were not listened to, they were ignored. The analysts seemed to accept the risks that were being taken were fine, that they didn't wait on serious financial explanation, took very small. One of the explanations they accepted was it's a black box. You put money in and more money comes out the other side. We don't really want to say what's going on in here because it's confidential, it's secret. This sort of idea that you are doing something so special you can't tell people about it because other people then copy you. And in the eyes of Enron, the greater men who should take the profit would lose out to the lesser man who will come down. These were large sums of money, perhaps to people like myself, but maybe to merchant bank. This should not have been that such a vast a sum that they should be completely overwhelmed by them. Okay, and the problem at the moment, of course, is that there are booming going on, and no one wants to listen to Eeyore in a boom, do they? Everyone wants to listen to Tigger. People want to hear the excitement and the exuberance. No one wants to be the person who is Eeyore, the person saying, "Oh no, wait, things aren't going well." So it's very difficult for people who are not prepared to accept Enron as being greatly successful to get a hearing. What about the auditors? Now, this was a very interesting one. Arthur Andersen kept signing off the accounts. Now, the surface thing, the very shallow interpretation of this is, Arthur Andersen was the the accountant who was also the auditor of Enron, and because Arthur Andersen was the auditor, clearly they were looking after their fees. And it's true that the partners in Houston were very reliant on Enron billing to get their own bonuses. But to Arthur Andersen itself, Enron wasn't that big a customer. I mean, it was a big individual customer compared to the huge numbers of customers that Arthur Andersen had. They really should not have been so in sort of obsessed and stuck and in love with the idea of Enron. And actually, there was so many other bigger corporations that had a say here. And in fact, this entire stream blew Arthur Andersen away. Worldwide international accountancy partnership was destroyed by the behaviour of its Enron office, its Houston office, because that was primarily dealing with Enron. And it's not as if there was a great... I mean, a lot of people came forward and said actually they knew there was something not quite right about Anderson's thing. But the problem was the markets kept going on. The shares kept rising. There's an old saying which says that if you see the market's wrong and you decide to bet against the market can stay wrong longer than you can stay solvent. And that's very true. So in fact, financially, it can be a good thing to try and go with the market even though you know it's wrong, because you're hoping to get that. And the hope, of course, is that you get out at the right time and aren't left holding the baby when everything goes terribly wrong. Yeah. So what is it related to shareholder value? Well, the philosophy of shareholder value says that there's a free market in corporate control, and badly run companies, the shares will fall in value and people buy it up. The problem was, of course, that where shares are being overvalued by the behaviour of the managers, where we have pump and dump going on, then how the hell do you get people to buy those shares? No one's going to buy a company which is overvalued, and therefore shareholder value starts to fall apart. And the concept is actually you can't have an overvalued company, overvalued by the deliberate actions of its management, will not be disciplined by the market and will not be taken over and not have better management put in. And so shareholder value has nothing to say really on these, doing that. And of course managers are being pressured and pushed. They have to keep overvaluing their shares. They have to keep talking them up because their incentives, their entire careers. The Enron sacked 10% of its staff every year, man. People who didn't make the grade, and some of these, of course, would be people who did not agree to undertake certain activities. I mean, they obviously said that during the time of the California crisis, when certain traders were having power stations shut down, anyone who stood up against this and refused it would lose their job. And at one point, they said the lunatics in charge of the asylum, the traders were running the company. The traders were running the company. The managers were not running the company, and this was a real problem for them. And so, for many years, companies looked at the branch of shareholder value, where actually sometimes they would actually hold profits back. So we've had a really good deal this year. Remember this what we talked about? Profit is just a matter of opinion. What matters is the value that's being generated. Enron was posting profits, but was not generating any value. So the reality at the moment is that shareholder values is letting the shareholders in, but actually it's keeping them away from the real things. It's stopping them to actually know what's going on. So as long as the share price keeps rising, Enron were able to raid future incomes in order to declare it today and therefore keep their paper profits up, their accounting profits up, which went against standard model of companies, which was if you had an extremely good year, you actually kept some of those profits back in order to book them in years that were lean, years that were not doing so well. And so the main issue here was that shareholder value philosophy was failing completely. So, and how does this relate to agency theory? Oh, right. How about board-based governance? How was board-based governance demonstrated through Enron? The board was mostly outsiders, as it should be, according to most of the models we've looked at. External governance, but also other models of this. We should actually have mostly outsiders on a board. Enron had mostly outsiders on the board. We linked all their performances to stock performance. If you're going to say that in order to keep good directors into a company, you should link their income to the performance of the stock to rewards to shareholders, absolutely, Enron's stock was booming. There was no problem in there. But they're rewarding risky ventures too much. The value of stock options is influenced by variance in as well as the growth of the stock price. The stock price has high variance, and because of that actually meant that stock options were becoming extremely valuable to directors, etc., and they were making a lot of money off it, and they were making money off the sort of things like that. I mean, one of the things about Enron is that people talk about it as if like the share price collapsed because Enron was exposed. In fact, Enron was only exposed when the share price and many share values went into a long decline. What happened was the big drop in share values across the market. This caused people to look closer at companies, and it was only then that people noticed that Enron had a problem, and Enron's stock kept plummeting when other stocks recovered. But if there hadn't been a decline across the market, then actually you might well have had the fact that Enron could have gone on much longer. And this was because this method was for encouraging risk-taking, encouraging fraud. And all of these were present in Enron. So we have a great example here of moral hazard, where, and certainly in some cases such as Pi, they were able to leave the company with $250 million and was never clawed back. But other people that actually got some money out and were able to keep taking money out. And the losses in the end were borne mostly by internal investors in the company, by staff who had invested their pension funds and invested their money from across the board. So therefore, there's a real sense of moral hazard where the directors were making money on the up and not losing on the down. So what was the end game? Okay, the whistleblowers blew. The first people started to do that, and I sometimes praised some reports of it, only when things were already starting to go bad. As the shares had collapsed, people were exposed. That is only when the first whistleblowers came forward. The corporate governance system should work in a way that encourages people to come forth and tell the truth and expose the truth. Anyway, at Enron, people only really started to tell the truth when they got up. And it was very much an argument that said that who leaves the ship first? Well, notoriously, the rats are the first people to leave a sinking ship. A lot of people rushed to the feds to try and make deals in order to protect themselves, but they weren't really looking after the interests of the shareholders, which were supposed to be, or about any of the other stakeholders, like the staff, the employees, all of whom lost money. We're talking about the small shareholders, the people who put their pensions, etc. in the thing. None of their interests being looked after. The rats bolted from the ship, some of them straight to the feds to try and sign plea deals that would keep them out of jail or get them lower sentences, and they're doing that. So we come with this old argument that I've often made for the patriotism and scoundrels. The idea that Burke says that patriotism is the last refuge of the scoundrel is not, as it often interpreted, to suggest that he was saying that all patriots are scoundrels. What he was saying, that when people are caught and have nowhere to rest, they will claim to be scoundrels. In this case, many of Enron's directors became shareholder value enthusiasts because they were trying to argue and debate why they'd done what they did. And it said, oh, we're boosting share prices and the interests of our shareholders. In fact, they were boosting share prices in their own interests, and they were still persuading other people to buy shares when they were trying to sell their shares as insiders. Yeah. But also, we have to say to some of the small investors that basically, if you work for a company and you have your pension invested in a company and you have your savings accounts, 401ks, mutual funds, invested in company shares, where's your diversity? Everyone says that you should never have more than 10% of your life invested, your 10% of your wealth investing in one company. Well, actually, if you work for a company, that in itself is 10%. So you really should not be doing any great investing in the companies you work for. So it's only if you're very wealthy, then maybe your wage is a small proportion of your income. But on most people, they should look to spread their risks around. A lot of people at Enron did not spread their risks around. So they were both worked for and invested, and many of them were tied in as well. The investment trust they signed up to meant they couldn't sell their shares at the time when many of the senior managers of the company, having pumped the shares up, were now dumping them while they were still at value, and the price was being kept up because the number of shares that were being sold was quite limiting compared to the numbers that were not able to be sold in as the price collapsed. Okay, so that's why employees didn't sell up and get out, because they couldn't do in many cases.